Now back to Just Energy Radio with Dr. Rita Louise.
Hello and welcome back to Just Energy Radio. I'm Dr. Rita Louise, and thank you all for staying tuned to the second hour of the show. Don't forget, Just Energy Radio is brought to you by SoulHealer.com and the Institute of Applied Energetics. That's AppliedEnergeticsInstitute.com. And do sign up for our weekly newsletter at JustEnergyRadio.com and check out the archives. So we're still talking with Stan Friedman of StanFriedman.com and Kathleen Marden of Kathleen-Marden.com. And we've also been talking about the new book that they are contributors for, UFOs and Aliens. Is there anybody out there? Kathleen, back to you, because you are an expert in this whole alien abduction thing, which really blows my mind. And, you know, we talked about Betty and Barney Hill, and are there other cases that are documented or perhaps even better documented than Betty and Barney?
There are some very well-documented cases dating back to the 1960s and mostly in the 1970s. And these are very intriguing cases because they were all cases where there were multiple witnesses who observed the craft. Sometimes they observed beings inside the craft. There was physical evidence that they had been abducted. They first, in many of these cases, either saw the craft hovering close to their vehicle. There were no bedroom abductions. They were all out driving or out in the woods. They happened to see what they at first, many of them thought was a plane in free fall coming down at night. It ended up stopping. It ended up hovering near their vehicle or over their vehicle. There were multiple witnesses who passed lie detector tests. They were all administered lie detector tests back then, except for Barney. And Barney was already deceased by the time Betty took a lie detector test and passed it. All of these people passed their lie detector tests, which is significant. When you give one individual a lie detector test, it might not be as significant. It might not be able to be used in a court of law. But when you have 3 to 6 or 7 people taking lie detector tests and passing them, then I believe that that is highly significant, that they are being truthful about what they observed. And so what I did in this book is I wanted to look at some of those early cases. I wanted to look for correlating information. Did they observe ETs that had the same type of physical description, or were they different? And I found in case after case, these individuals were reporting and describing the same grayish-colored, short extraterrestrials. Many of the early people didn't describe those big black almond eyes. They were describing eyes that contained irises and pupils, but they were all very large eyes and slanted. They all had a slit for a mouth. They didn't observe lips. They didn't observe ears. They were all hairless, and they were all dressed in tight-fitting uniforms. These individuals often had physical evidence on their bodies, burns on their backs, conjunctivitis after their experience, feeling ill, having weight loss, significant weight loss. So many of them were injured by their abductions. They all experienced about an hour and a half to 2 hours of missing time, except for Travis Walton, of course, who was missing and being searched for 5 full days. And so I did find some very significant overlapping information here in these early cases. In the book, I discussed the Hill case, the Antonio Villas-Boas case in Brazil. It happened on October 15, 1957, but it wasn't revealed in the United States until about 10 years later, so we didn't know about it. It was very well investigated, and investigated almost immediately after it happened. And he and his brother had both observed the craft. And he had an abduction very similar to many of the others. However, there was a sexual component to his that wasn't in the other abductions. I talked about an abduction that occurred in 1969, or 1968 rather. It was August 7, 1968. Walter Webb, who investigated the Betty and Barney Hill abduction, also investigated this. The individuals were hypnotized separately. He did a comparative analysis of their statements under hypnosis and found a statistically significant positive correlation between the individuals' statements. That was very significant. I discussed the Travis Walton, November 1975 case, and also the case of 3 women in Casey County, Kentucky. It happened only 2 months after Travis Walton's abduction, and it was another very significant case. So I'm very intrigued by those early cases because there was an abundance of evidence that they were real cases.
And there weren't a whole lot of other people going, oh, I was abducted last week, and all saying the same thing. I mean, these were authentic individual people separated by time and space and not a whole lot of material to steal from.
And they were very well investigated cases. The funds were there to get in early on these abductions and to investigate them, to have physical examinations, to have this lie detector testing, to do personality profiles on these people, psychological testing. And the funding just isn't available as often today to do this kind of testing. And they all did fine on their psychological evaluations on the scales that they were administered. They were all normal.
Did any of these people turn up with the implants, and even if there's just a general commentary about the whole concept of alien implants that you guys might have?
Well, as far as I know, implants were discovered later on. There's reason to believe that there might have been implants. At least they had some way of tracking some of these early abductees because they were revisited sometimes. Travis Walton was not revisited, but the women from Kentucky, 2 of them, reported being visited after their initial contact. And also, they seem to have some way of tracking my Aunt Betty Hill. So there's a possibility, but none of them were ever tested for implants. And in those who died, implants were not looked for through autopsies or anything else.
I should add that Dr. Roger Lear in California has removed several implants from ostensible abductees. They're peculiar little devices. Some of them emit radio waves, which is kind of strange. And as long ago as at least 10 years ago, you could buy a little device about the size of a small BB that you could implant under the skin of a dog, a cow, a person, and when you wave an appropriate rod, a transponder rod at it, it would send you a signal identifying by number and other information where that implant was. And if we could do that 10 years ago, think of how much more sophisticated the aliens could be. And they might only be 1,000 years ahead of us, no less a million. And sometimes we are so much in the present that we forget how times have changed technologically. I was speaking to two classes of students at the University of Detroit a few years back, mentioned how much technology had changed, and mentioned that when I started working in industry, I was using a slide rule. And I looked around the class, no reaction at all. So I had guts enough to ask, any of you know what a slide rule is? Not one student out of many dozen. That was less than 50 years. So the technology available to somebody who got started a bit ahead of us, maybe 1,000, 1,000,000 years before us, could be totally beyond our ken, something about which we would know nothing. And so I did ask a Canadian woman who had been abducted. She had an opportunity to talk to somebody who looked like us, who had been part of the abduction team, apparently, and she asked, why me? Everybody's question. You're easy to track. And the implication was that we give off something that somebody else can latch onto. So if they want to revisit, they can. Now, that's pretty sophisticated, but it makes sense to me.
Mm-hmm. The search for these implants, I think, is pretty intriguing, and Daryl Sims and Roger Lear have both been doing this. It was Daryl's idea initially, and they worked together for a while, and then they worked separately. And in a chapter that I wrote in our book, Science Was Wrong, that was published in 2010, I outlined some of the very significant findings that Daryl and Roger have discovered in implants that were removed from individuals. And one very interesting thing to me is that normally when a foreign object is placed in the body, our bodies will reject it. But in the case of these implants, they appear to be covered with a substance that prevents the body from rejecting them. And they are attached to nerve endings. And that is just not something that we find with foreign objects in the body. And also, Roger Lears had removed an implant from an individual that transmitted in deep space. So that was very significant as well, I thought.
When they take these implants out, do they do anything? I mean, have they been able to, back engineer them or anything like that?
Well,
no, but they have measured signals.
What they discovered initially was that when they removed the implants, if they just left them out on a counter or in a plastic bag or something, they would sometimes explode or they would simply disintegrate. And they found that they have to keep them in human fluids. But they have been able to look at some of these. As Stan said, did you say, Stan, they haven't been able to back engineer them?
I don't think they back engineered them, but I think maybe that's why we developed a technique for doing it. Because you can buy implantable devices that can go into live animals or humans and
absolutely
spit back information, so that if we can do it now, we young earthlings, unless you believe the world was created in 4004 BC, as Bishop Ussher said, if you believe it was, you got to add 6 zeros to that, then there's plenty of time for others out there. I mean, the universe is 13 billion years old, Earth only 4-point-something or other, so plenty of time for somebody to do what we can't yet do. Which is exciting. It's frustrating to some people. They don't want to think that we're not at the top of the heap, but You know, that's really as a philosophical concept. Remember, we went through the business of originally the Earth was the center of the universe, and woe be unto he who disagreed. Copernicus wrote a book, 1543, in which he had the gall to suggest, no, the Earth's not the center of the universe, the sun is. And instead of all the bodies revolving around the Earth in some of the weirdest orbits you'll ever see, they revolved around the sun. Well, now we know that old Nick wasn't right either. I mean, he was fortunate. He died the year his book was published. Somebody else, Giordano Bruno, was burned at the stake for saying that the sun was the middle of the universe. Now we're ready, some of us, to recognize that the sun isn't the middle of the universe. Man is not at the top of the heap. I hate to disappoint anybody who thinks we are. And we've got a real conundrum for us. Where do we fit in the larger scheme of things? I'd say we're down near the bottom myself.
I don't know, Stan. That might be a whole separate show just to talk about the philosophical aspects of our place in the universe. Kathleen, you were saying?
I just wanted to add something about implants before we could talk more about my chapter. And that is that veterinarians on a fairly routine basis now insert implants into family pets. And we're also talking about now using medical technology to put implants in nursing home patients and Alzheimer's patients so that if they become lost, we can track them.
Actually, I had read an article a couple of years ago where they were talking about putting them into patients in psychiatric hospitals where if they walked up to a door that they could go through, the door would unlock. And if they walked up to a door that they weren't supposed to go through, there would be no signal to let them through. I mean, so it seems like they've come up with a lot of different things they could use with this technology.
Yes, It does sound that way.
We got a lot to learn.
Mm-hmm.
Kind of staying with the abduction thing, I'm throwing this out to both of you. There are people that say that abductions really aren't true and that it's just the men in black or the government. What are your thoughts? Do you think that they might have a role in what people see as abductions, or are we talking there are two different activities going on? What's your thought on that whole belief that people have?
Well, from the descriptions of the ETs, particularly in those individuals in the early abductions where there was so much evidence, they're talking about individuals who are definitely not human and not any variety of human being that we might create. Their joints are different. Their hands are different. The lengths of their limbs are different. The size of their heads in proportion to their bodies are different. They have maybe have a membrane inside of their mouths. They don't have teeth. They're not at all human. So, these appear not to be part of some kind of psychological or black ops project by the government. Now, some people report nowadays that is happening. I'm not going to say that it isn't. There's always a possibility that it is. And we also have many individuals nowadays who believe that they have been abducted on a long-term basis from their bedrooms when they were sleeping. There are individuals who have never observed a UFO, who have never, in their conscious recollection, observed non-human entities outside of their bedrooms, who believe that they have been abducted. And there are some viable psychological explanations for alternatives to real abductions taking place here. And, it involves sleep paralysis. It involves hypnagogic or hypnopompic hallucinations. I go into great detail about this in the chapter, and that might explain some abductions that really are not physical abductions, but at the same time, we have case after case where individuals have observed the UFO. Going back in history, not right now, but 40% of those who had an abduction saw the craft first. They had a close encounter with it. They often observed non-humans on board the craft. And 30% have full conscious recollection of at least part of the abduction experience. Whereas today, and I'm talking about 2011, the UFO investigators and researchers that I'm talking to, and from the individuals whose abductions I am currently investigating, I'm finding that it seems to be exclusively from the bedroom without convincing physical evidence. So I don't know if this is a change in the modus operandi of the ETs or if these are merely psychological in nature. Probably part are real and part are not.
We need more courses.
Off-the-wall question, but are there any kind of like racial, demographic types that you find? I'm going to assume that abductions happen worldwide, but do they find that there's any kind of racial connection or geographic connection to abduction cases?
Well, some abduction researchers have studied the genetics of people who have been abducted, and these are just the people that they're working with. And they have traced it back to Turkey, for one thing. And also they believe that many abductees have a Native American Celtic background as well. So there have been correlations among these groups. But it seems when you look at the overall picture, this is happening all over the world, across races. It's happening to both sexes. So it seems to occur across the spectrum.
And, we have such a problem here. With normal UFO sightings, just seeing some darn old saucer in the sky, typically only 10% of the people have had a sighting, but only 10% of them have reported what they have seen. For fear of ridicule is what I get told. Anyway, that's the reason they didn't report it. Now, when you start talking about abductions, I'm sure the percentage of cases that occur that we hear about is much lower than 10%. Because if you're worried about ridicule and you talk about just seeing a darn old flying saucer, what are you thinking about if you think you might have been abducted? You talk about ridicule, huh? So it's one of the it's one of the things we hope that our book captured helps people to understand that this isn't craziness. This isn't far-out, imaginative stuff from science fiction writers. This is real world, and we need to know more about it, more about what's going on, and maybe learn about the abductors. I mean, that's what I'm concerned about. What do these guys want? Where are they from? Why are they doing this? Is this a thesis project for some psychological course out at Zeta Reticuli? I don't know. Are they doing hybridization? We really only have bare bones of what's going on. We need more. Our email address, our addresses are available. We'd like to hear more about this, and we don't use witness names without permission. But we're not getting all the data. It's as simple as that.
I mean, even with Betty and Barney, they didn't have necessarily conscious recollection of being abducted. So
no.
I would think there'd be a percentage of people that may have been abducted that don't even know it.
Right.
Well, except for the missing time and the close encounter with the craft. I heard from a woman today. I hear from people on a fairly regular basis who have never come forward with their names or with their abduction stories. And, I hear over and over again The craft comes down. They're driving late at night. The craft paces their vehicle or flies parallel to their vehicle very close. And then they have this period of lost time, and it's generally between an hour and a half and 2.5 hours. And it has happened to a lot of people. I can tell you that because I'm receiving reports on a regular basis.
We don't have many colleges.
I went on this crystal digging thing, and it was kind of on this mountain, which they didn't tell us you had to drive like an hour down this dirt road in the middle of nothing. And it was dark by the time we started down the mountain. And the entire time down the mountain, all I kept thinking to myself is, watch the clock, watch the clock. No missing time, no flying saucers. I just want to go home. And I didn't have any missing time. I felt so good after the whole thing was over. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Dan, you were saying?
Well, this is a whole area that requires investigation, serious research, and, it's like a new disease. In our book, Science Was Wrong, we talk about HIV in the early days and the resistance to certain aspects of it from people. Well, it's the same situation here. There was resistance to the notion that HIV could be spread by blood transfusion. Turned out that 10,000 Americans were made HIV positive. These were hemophiliacs that had lots of blood transfusions. So it would be nice if we had known that a lot sooner and saved a lot of people a lot of difficulty. We don't have many people doing their thesis work about UFO abductions, although interestingly enough, there have been a couple of hundred, 206, I think, theses, bachelor's, master's, and PhDs, done on UFO-related thesis topics. A guy compiled the list, which I was very impressed with. But we need more of that. How do you find out about a really puzzling, significant event or condition? You need data, and it's hard to get the data when there is this aura of ridicule and stuff. So there are colleges at which courses have been taught, but they're few and far between about UFOs, believe it or not. And so we got to break through that laughter curtain.
What about the people that just generically claim I've had a UFO abduction? I mean, the UFO community is not my main area. It's a satellite area for me. I'm more into the metaphysical, psychic area. Mm-hmm. And then, and there are the people that go, well, in my 12th past life in Atlantis, and my name was this, and I can't help but roll my eyes just a little bit, In the UFO community, do you find the same kind of thing where there are these self-proclaimed abductees?
Yes.
Yes, I do. And that is the most difficult part of it, investigating UFO abductions today, because most of them are claims of abduction from a bedroom, and there's no physical evidence. And if you don't have any physical evidence, all you have is an interesting story. It's an anecdotal report, but it really is something that can't be investigated. And, a lot of these people will recall waking up during the night. They're paralyzed. They can only move their eyes. They might see the heads of 3 little aliens at the foot of their beds. They want to cry out, but they can't. They can't do anything, and the next thing they know, they're waking up in the morning. Now, if they then pay somebody to hypnotize them or don't go to a mental health professional to have this done, or to someone who's highly qualified and experienced in working with abductees, they might confabulate an abduction under hypnosis. And once that is confabulated, they will come firmly to believe that it was a real experience even though it was probably a psychological experience. And I think that this is tragic because people are traumatized, people are having difficulty sleeping at night. They're worried about this experience that they've been having with these ETs, when in fact it might only be psychological. It might not have actually occurred. And the only way that we can really investigate this is when there are multiple witnesses and when there is physical evidence that something has happened.
Not easy to find those.
Yeah,
we're giving
and we also have
Stan.
we have
What?
people who proclaim their wonderful, fulfilling abduction experiences. They're not abductions; they're contact experiences. And many people are channeling the ETs, and they're having these very positive contacts, mostly with blonde aliens too. They're reporting this. But again, there's no evidence. They haven't been able to submit any evidence that this is real. Makes an interesting story, but again, without any evidence, all you have is an anecdote. And that is not something that the UFO community can investigate scientifically.
Good point.
Incidentally, maybe I should throw in here that we've only talked about abductions, primarily Betty and Barney Hill and all the rest of that, but there are physical cases that do have evidence. Listeners think that, well, you really got to be wary of any UFO story. There are multiple witness radar visual sightings. There are physical trace cases where you can go see where the saucer had landed, where witnesses saw it on the ground and it took off, and you can find physical changes, the equivalent of burn circles, burn rings, landing gear marks, small footprints. Ted Phillips in Missouri has looked at more than 4,000 such cases from 80 countries. So I just want to get the larger picture here that abductions are part of the phenomena, an important part, but they're not the only part of the phenomena. And I like radar visual cases, for example, because the Japan airline case where you have a big 747, big UFO shows up twice the size of an aircraft carrier, and they contact the ground. This is up in Alaska, and it's seen on their radar, the plane's radar, and then they contact the ground, and the ground radar people see the airplane and the UFO. And they record the tapes of the two of them together. This is out in the middle of nowhere in Alaska. So we have cases like that. And incidentally, the government was very interested when the FAA guy brought all this stuff to them, and they took it all away. So I don't want people to think that much as we are interested in abductions, that that's the whole story of UFOs. And certainly we want to be sure that they recognize that there is a phenomenon called sleep paralysis, and that isn't the whole story of UFO abductions by any means. Try driving a car while you're sleeping. That's not an easy task.
Also, in some of these nocturnal bedroom abductions, we find that the witnesses or those who think they've been abducted have found themselves waking up outside. They might be holding a strange material in their hands that has been analyzed in a laboratory and found to be anomalous. These people find that they're locked out with deadbolt locks in place. Yeah. There's no way to get in. They've had to pound on the bedroom window to wake up their spouses. No explanation for how they got outside. They're finding physical trace evidence on the ground in some of these cases where the craft has apparently landed and the grass is killed, and that has undergone laboratory analysis. So we certainly can't say that everyone who has had a nocturnal bedroom abduction experience is having a psychological experience. Some of these actually do leave physical evidence. I know of one man who woke up on his roof and without a ladder, which is very perplexing. We have people who are being returned in somebody else's pajamas. So
these aliens aren't perfect.
That one, Kathy. Not even going to touch that. Let's shift topics here again.
Okay.
And I don't know if this is a YouTube phenomena. Okay, please excuse my source. Or if this is reality, but it seems like, based on YouTube videos, that there's been an increase in UFO activity. Has there been, or is it just junk?
Well, you know that the Mutual UFO Network last month had over 500 sighting reports. And over the last year or so, you get 300, 400, 500, 300. I don't see a substantial increase. Do you, Kathy?
I don't see a substantial increase, but we have to remember that this is summertime, and more people are outside at night than during the winter time. And I think in the summertime we generally do see an increase in reports simply because people are outside. They're camping, they're having a campfire or spending time outside at night.
Yeah, I live in Fredericton, New Brunswick, Canada, and there aren't that many people wandering about in the middle of winter here. And the days are very short as well.
And it seems that in order to have something to put on YouTube, you would have to have some kind of video footage to put out there. And I think with, video cameras in your cell phone, people have the technology in hand, literally, in order to film stuff, whether it's real or not. I'm not making a judgment, where even 10 years ago, you had to run in the house and go get the video camera, even if you thought to do that in the first place.
Well, it's true that technology has changed, and also YouTube is a new channel for people to get attention, if you will, and that makes some of us rather wary of automatically trusting what's on there. You sort of automatically distrust. It's a great place for attention getting.
That's true. We very often receive YouTube videos, and they seem intriguing at first, and you have to wait for the photo analysis, and then you find out in a day or two that it's actually a hoax. So there are those people who want to perpetrate hoaxes and put them on YouTube.
I mean, I just remember this one. It was like this cube flying over Russia, and these guys in their car driving all around, following it around, and it was interesting. But you didn't really hear about it from anybody else, but it just seems like there's just been a lot of that, and I just wanted to get your guys' input on that whole topic. So I guess the buyer beware when it comes to YouTube.
Very much buyer beware, and let's face it, from a government technology viewpoint, a darn old light in the sky or a saucer in the sky is not a big deal. You want much more scientific information, measurements with, say, radar, or with instruments on board aircraft, or from a spy satellite. And you won't see much of that getting on YouTube. And it's one of those situations. There was a Canadian memo way back in 1950 that said flying saucers is the most classified subject in the United States, even more so than the H-bomb, before the H-bomb was publicly discussed. And the good stuff, you're not going to find much on YouTube, I don't believe. For example, if an F-16 is chasing a UFO, you remember that case near Stephenville, Texas, where the government said, oh, no, we didn't have any F-16s out, and then a few weeks later, it turns out we had 10 of them flying around. Mm-hmm. Some of those craft have instruments on board. You're never going to see that instrument data, I'll tell you that.
I thought they actually got the towers self-report thing, and a guy made a three-dimensional model and showed the flight path of the planes. I thought that was actually released and analyzed.
Well, I remember that the MUFON people got the radar records and were able to show that there was an anomalous system up there, big, behaving in strange ways. I mean, we don't have airplanes that go very fast and stop, for example, quickly and then start again and so forth. And so, there's been some decent work done. The guys in Texas did a lot of work on Stephenville. But again, you have the problem of where do you get the money to do the analysis? How do you get people to be willing to stand up in public? How do you get the government to tell the truth? That sounds cynical as can be, but lying is a way of life when it comes to governments and difficult areas. This isn't the only one, obviously. Sorting things out is not easy. And it's one of the reasons why some people want disclosure. How are we going to find out what really is going on if we don't have an idea of what fraction of what we do hear about is legitimate and what isn't? It's tough.
Exactly.
I should throw something else. Can I throw in something else that we haven't talked about? But the other chapter that I wrote for UFOs and aliens, one was about the cover-up, and the other was about you can get here from there. And it's a point I've often run into. People who should know better, they have several degrees, you can't get here from there, Stan. And one of the reasons that I refer people to science was wrong is we have a whole history and a whole bunch of other areas of technology where it's impossible was said by very smart people who were totally wrong. And technological progress comes from doing things differently in an unpredictable way. One of my favorites was a Dr. Campbell who in 1941 was sick and tired of all this nonsense about going to the moon. Science fiction stories were very common about that. So he was out to show that that was nonsense. He published a scientific paper with equations calculating the required initial launch weight of a rocket able to get a man to the moon and back. It's a legitimate question. How big does darn thing have to be? His bottom line is it would have to weigh 1 million tons. Fast forward 29 years, or 28 years in that case, and we got 3 guys on the moon and back, and the initial launch weight was 3,000 tons. He was off a factor of 300 million. He hadn't the faintest idea of how to do the calculations. He assumed a single-stage rocket, a limit of 1g acceleration, that the rocket had to provide all the energy, and just a whole bunch of really stupid assumptions that he should have known better about if he'd read the literature, but of course he hadn't because he knew that there couldn't possibly be any possibility of getting to the moon. And so we really need to learn from these smart people saying stupid things, and there are consequences. Kathy did a chapter in the book about medical situations, several chapters, in which there was a price to pay. People died because the powers that be made pronouncements instead of doing investigation. One of my favorite people was Ignaz Semmelweis, and Kathy knows all about him. Tell us, Kathy.
Okay. Well, he was a physician in Vienna in the mid-19th century, and he was charged with supervising medical students in the obstetrics unit of the Vienna General Hospital. Now, there were 2 units there. There was the midwives unit, where they used wooden models, and then to study human anatomy. And then there was the medical students unit where they used cadavers. And every morning they would dissect the cadavers of the women and infants who had died the day before. And what had happened was that the whole rows of women were dying in the obstetrics unit, but not in the midwife unit. There was a 2% mortality rate in the midwife unit, 20% at times in the obstetrical unit. And what Semmelweis discovered was that germs were being carried from the cadavers to the women who were in labor. The medical students would simply wipe their bloody hands on their aprons and not wash their hands and go in and do internal examinations on these women. And as a result, they were contracting the childbed fever and dying in great numbers along with their infants. And so he instituted a simple hand-washing procedure. And every medical student would have to wash his hands before he examined the women. And for that, the mortality rate dropped to the rate that it was in the midwifery section. So that was highly successful. However, his supervisor considered him to be insubordinate. He was defying the supervisor's rules, and as a result, he ended up losing his job. And he conducted laboratory tests to show that he was correct. He did these experiments on rabbits. He published, he spoke, and he was debunked throughout Europe as being a fraud, as being a charlatan. And it wasn't until after his death that we discovered that he was right, and he was acknowledged. And even Austria has issued a postage stamp with his photograph and his name. And there is a medical hospital named after him in Hungary. So, but unfortunately, thousands of women and infants died because the powers that be in those days would not accept his findings.
Yeah, that case is particularly striking to me, and we have many other examples in Science Was Wrong. It's listed on both our websites, too, but there's a message here. Be careful what you say is impossible, because you may be wrong. You simply may be making the wrong assumptions. You're standing in the way of progress. Another example, Billy Mitchell was a airman for the United States in World War I. And after the war, he was going on about how airplanes could drop bombs and sink ships, a whole new concept. And the Secretary of the Navy said, I'll stand on the deck of any ship he's going to try to sink, ha, ha, ha. And he eventually was court-martialed for insubordination again. And it turns out he was right, and it's ironical. On November 29th, 1941, was the annual Army-Navy football game. And in the program, there was a picture of the USS Arizona, this huge battleship, and a statement that nobody had ever sunk a battleship from the sky. 8 days later was Pearl Harbor Day, and the USS Arizona was sunk, sending 1,100 men to their watery graves. The Japanese knew you could sink a ship. You didn't need to vaporize it. Just open a few seams. Let the water do the work. It's dangerous. It can be extremely painful to listen to people who do their research by proclamation rather than investigation. That's what we see on the UFO scene. Quite often, the guys that I politely call the nasty, noisy negativists and naysayers and fossilized physicists, I can say that because I'm a physicist, see, so they can't say, how does he dare to call them that name? Well, it's true. Their thinking is fossilized. So there are some lessons to be learned here. And if you look carefully, you'll find that in many, many instances, the guy with the new idea was berated, was hooted at, was laughed at. If he persisted, you might get a major change in a new technology. And maybe our understanding of where we fit in the universe or in our local galactic neighborhood will be increased as we recognize that there are aliens coming here, and whether we like it or not.
Well, that brings me up to a question I've been saving for the end. So there's been a lot of clamor about that Ancient Aliens series. Where do you guys kind of fit into the whole thought that they've been here before?
Well, I always refer people to Dr. Barry Downing's book, The Bible and Flying Saucers. Barry has a bachelor's degree in physics and a doctorate in divinity, and divine physics is his beat, and he goes through the Old and New Testament, which date back a few thousand years, and finds saucer sightings. Now, they didn't use the term saucer. They only used mugs, no cups either. But and it would appear, if we look at the drawings in ancient caves, if we check with the remnants of old civilizations, we find one guy and his wife did a study of 11 different civilizations. They found that in every single one, there was a background of stories of beings coming down from space in craft, not gods. Now, the historians wanted to call them gods because we know there aren't any beings coming from down in space, from outer space. But if there are that many civilizations with the same basic ideas, something's going on. So I think they've been around a long time, and after all, the Earth's been around a long time, and the neighborhood's been around a long time, and I think this might have been a common place for visitors. How about the honeymoon capital of this corner of the galaxy, or maybe a penal colony? They dumped all the bad boys and girls here, and that's why we're so nasty to each other. And I was surprised when I went to Australia that they were proud of their convict heritage. The people in Georgia aren't.
That's kind of an interesting little thought. Because when you look at the mythology, it's like all we do is fight with each other and have, illicit affairs. I mean, it's kind of interesting, the history that we claim from our past. We came at chips, and then we just, fought each other, had these incestuous relationships, and, bumped each other off for ultimate control. Okay, it's better than a soap opera reading some of this stuff.
You're right. And, someday maybe there's a library out there that we can get a card for once we become part of the local Galactic Federation, when we find out what's the real story of our past. I don't think we know it yet.
Do you think that, there are people that say that we've been quarantined because we're young and stupid? Do you think there's any credence to that theory?
Well, I usually put it the other way around. I think one of the things they want to do is keep us from going out there. Rather than saying nobody can come here, I think they're quarantining us. Look, if you were an alien, would you want this primitive society whose major activity is tribal warfare to take its brand of friendship out there? I don't think so.
I do believe they have reason to be concerned about our behavior, what we do to each other as a population of the world. The number of people that we have killed, the sense of ethnocentricity and egocentricity that they're observing in humans, and the violence should be of big concern to them. They certainly wouldn't want our types out there traveling to their planets.
Remember, we have H-bombs. And the same fusion technology, same understanding of this whole physical process can be used if you want to spend the money to develop a propulsion system. So you got bad guys exploding nuclear weapons who, if they want, will start sailing abroad, so to speak. That would be of concern, I should think, to any rational beings in the neighborhood.
Well, and I don't understand why they haven't worked on developing that technology. I don't understand why we stopped going to the moon. You know, I don't understand what's going on with the whole space program in general. I mean, now they're going to be stopping all of the shuttle launches. What's NASA going to be doing next? Anything?
Trying to negotiate with others so that they can send Americans up in the Soyuz and other spacecraft. The Chinese and the Indians and the Japanese are going ahead. We live in a strange world. From my viewpoint, anyway.
It changes every minute. Well, we have, I'm going to say, about 5 minutes left before the music's going to come up. Any last imparting words or topics you want to get into for 5 minutes before we need to go?
I'd like to mention that the state of New Hampshire has recently erected a memorial historic plaque for Betty and Barney, commemorating the 50th anniversary of their UFO encounter. It's on Route 3 in North Lincoln, New Hampshire. And Stan and I are going to be up in New Hampshire soon.
Hello, I'm on the telephone. Call me back on the radio.
We'll both be speaking at the Exeter UFO Festival in Exeter, New Hampshire on September 3rd. It's
Saturday.
Free to the public. And then we will be at on September 23rd and 24th at the Indian Head Resort. The Indian Head Resort is the last resort that Betty and Barney remembered passing before they had their close encounter in that field where the UFO swooped down and hovered only 200 feet initially above their car and then 100 feet above Barney. So the Indian Head Resort is going to be hosting a 50th anniversary event, and I'm going to be lecturing on Friday night, September 23rd, and Stan is going to come in and he's going to lecture on the star map investigation and research. And then the next day we'll be giving a guided tour of the close encounter route on a couple of buses, and we'll take people to every spot where Betty and Barney traveled. You'll be able to hear excerpts of In Their Own Words, that DVD, as Betty and Barney explain exactly what they were looking at that night. So I'm pretty excited about that and about the historical marker that has been placed on Route 3 in North Lincoln, New Hampshire by the state of New Hampshire.
Incidentally, I don't know of any other case where that's happened, where a serious UFO event has been commemorated officially by the state in which it occurred. I mean, the state of New Mexico recognizes Roswell as a great place for tourists to go, but I don't see any historic marker there. Kathy had to answer a zillion questions before they agreed to go ahead with this one.
I submitted the petition, I believe it was in 2007 or 2008, and ended up having, for every statement I made, I had to back it up with footnotes. In all, I had 20 footnotes and 28 references for one short paragraph on the marker.
But you got it, and I think that's really cool.
They wanted to make sure that if anybody objected to any of the statements, they could back it up with factual information. Yes, it's very cool.
Yeah, I've never heard of something like that. And you're right, Roswell doesn't have anything. You know, they just want to erase the whole UFO thing from their city if they could.
Well, that was at the beginning. Once the dollars started showing up, they changed their mind. I know, I've been involved ever since, and it was funny. The people in the town said, "You want us to be the UFO capital of the world? Are you crazy?" They'll be laughing at us. Now they tout the event. There was one night a month ago or so where 1,900 people visited the museum in Roswell. And it's 200 miles from Albuquerque, from Amarillo, from El Paso. If you're there, it's because you want to be there. So suddenly other places have recognized that maybe there's some benefit to some UFO publicity, properly done, of course. And I am proud to say that I was inducted into the Roswell UFO Hall of Fame 2 years ago.
Well, congratulations.
That and $2 will get you a cup of coffee at the local McDonald's, which looks like a flying saucer in Roswell.
But it's resume material, you know? I mean, that's the important thing.
Yeah.
Well, yes, our time is just about up, and I want to thank you guys for coming on. I love having the two of you on. It's just like sitting in the living room and having a good chat. So.
Well, thanks for having us.
We've enjoyed it. Remember, www.stantonfriedman.com, and Kathy?
And www.Kathleen with a K, hyphen or dash Marden, MARDEN.com. Our books are for sale, our products are for sale, and all of our lectures, upcoming lectures, are listed on our website. So if you want more information about those, you can just visit either of our websites.
And the name of the new Betty and Barney DVD is?
It's In Their Own Words.
Excellent. You guys are just too cool. But Stan, I keep waiting to see you on that Ancient Alien show. I keep waiting, and it's like, where's Stan? He should be on there.
I think I've been on one of the shows, but we don't get it up here in Canada, so I don't know.
YouTube. They're all on YouTube.
Oh, okay. I'll look.
The source of my information. That's just a joke. Okay, music, come on. There it goes. Anyway, guys, I will talk to you again, I'm sure not that far down the road. And be well, be blessed. Congratulations on the marker. And we'll talk again soon.
Okay.
Thank you.
Talk to you soon. Bye-bye.
All right, bye-bye. Stan Friedman and Kathleen Marden. Again, their web pages are StantonFriedman.com and Kathleen-Marden.com. And next week, we're going to be having a ghosty kind of show. We're going to be speaking with Mark Human about seeing ghosts with God's eyes and Peter Haviland about poltergeist. And so until next week, I'm Dr. Rita Louise. Be blessed.
Join host Dr. Rita Louise each week at this time for Just Energy Radio. Point your browser to www.justenergyradio.com for more show information